Hey yo. So, I watched Velma, or at least one episode of Velma. I was gonna watch more, but oh boy, it is just so painful. The rumors were true. It's not just bad, it has created an entirely new low just so it has enough sludge to sink into. If I were Catholic, I'd cross myself after seeing this. In fact, I might as well. This video wasn't meant to be a review, since every critic on the planet has already done one in depth, but then trash like Velma wasn't meant for human consumption, so here we are. A quick review, and then on to why Western animation is so far behind at creating content adults might enjoy. Commencing review. To start out, this show is really dumb and hateful. Really, honestly hateful. Specifically towards anything white, rich, or popular. But generally, the writer does also seem to loathe most things pop culture, and Velma is just her attempt to recreate that pop culture in her own twisted image. Which is too bad, because there was a surprising amount of this show that could have worked and been entertaining. Could have, if Mindy Kaling didn't seem to despise actively the culture she lives in, the source material she's using, and all the characters, especially Fred, and maybe Velma. It's gotta be hard to create a character that awful unintentionally. On the topic of the almost decent, there were, 2 or 3 jokes, at least I think they're supposed to be jokes. Mindy never really changes the cadence of Velma's voice, so it's hard to tell. But there were a few times, very few, where I had to pause the show and think about it and agree that, you know what, yeah, with a different voice actress and more expressive animation, that could have been funny. Like when she's talking with Norville about her dad's girlfriend and how much he hates her. There was something there that could almost have been funny if it was said by anyone who knew what they were doing. This is, coincidentally, one of the few times Velma is talking about something her character hated in the show, rather than just what Mindy seems to hate about the reality around her, or meta-commenting on something. This is one of 2 or 3 times, actually, which were the only other moments I considered would have worked if, everything was changed. Even just making the animation style more interesting could have helped sell some parts as being funny even when Mindy's voice acting couldn't. I've seen clips from later episodes and brief glimpses of the oddballity in this one. Pushing the style limits of the animation could have at least made it more visually appealing to counteract the terrible characters. But that's just another failed opportunity, like the jokes. Or what this show seems to think passes jokes, i.e. all the meta comments, which are just too tone deaf to even consider laughing at. Like, straight up telling the audience and taunting them that every single character, except the dumb one you're supposed to hate, Fred, has been race swapped. Whole meta-commentary there. And the one about sex in a pilot episode, which was delivered in a way no person has ever spoken to another human being in the history of the world. Meta-commented again, of course, by a naked teenage girl. All within the first 3 minutes. So relatable. So brave. Really just going all out on all those tropes people expect in shows nowadays and beating its grave with a dead horse. Honestly, I don't know what world Mindy and the other writers of this show live in, where these meta thoughts are true or even make sense, but it sure isn't this one. Probably some exclusive Hollywood click for the unpopulars. Anyway, other things Velma almost had going for it. Some of the story threads could have been interesting if they were used interestingly, like Velma's hallucinations and guilt over her mother's disappearance. The hallucinations and trauma could have been a valuable story to explore over the course of the season, but as is, they're just there as things that happen whenever Velma says mystery. The show seems to tease that she could have a heart attack from them, but yeah, right, I wish that would happen. And any actual story about Velma's serious mental health issues are just there for laughs. And I say laughs loosely since there's really nothing funny in this show, especially when it's trying to be humorous. The story thread about her life as a kid with her mother could have also been interesting, again, if it had been played out over the course of the series and treated seriously. Especially since the writers had enough sense to show her idea of what happened and then juxtapose it with reality. Kind of reminds me of Shazam, but it's still a step up. But again, it's played out way too fast in the first episode and leaves the audience without a single point in Velma's personal life to care about. Wasted Potential must have been their backup title for this dumpster fire. Anyway, back to the show. Consider Velma's personality flaws, which are really the only thing she has, flaws. They could have been useful too if anyone in the show pointed out that they were flaws and then Velma had to make an effort or was forced to improve upon them. But no, Velma's selfishness, violent tendencies, yes, I still remember that straight up assault when she hit Daphne with the cane. Or is that fine since Daphne was trying to drown her friend? I don't know. Did I mention I hate all of these characters? Anyway, character flaws. Violent tendencies, utter disdain for anyone and anything not herself, and the bad habit of jumping to conclusion that anyone she personally hates is a murderer. All traits that are just played off as part of her personality. Not character flaws that really need to be worked on. I imagine she'll spend the series safely inside the cult of "you're perfect just the way you are" and continue to despise self-improvement and personal responsibility. Let's see, any other good things? The sound design and animation were passable, but just barely. It's kind of the only thing that was passable in this show. Well, that's it for the potentially good. Everything else is complete and utter trash. Including, but not limited to, the characters. They're all trite, hateful, and loathsome, particularly Velma. The humor and meta jokes. If it got any dumber and more self-absorbed, my brain would have threatened to fall out and run away too. And the story. Pitiful, boring, and did I say self-absorbed yet? So, that's it. That's the review. Everything's terrible. Velma does just exemplify everything I hate about Hollywood's adult animations, and that's not even for how stupid it is. Velma falls into the same popular genre as other animated shows particularly marketed as adult despite the animation. These shows are recognizable by their over-reliance on gore, sex, and smut talk to make sure you know they're made for an adult audience. Other shows in this category are Vox Machina, Santa Incorporated, and Archer. And I know Archer has a fan base, and I'm sure Vox Machina does too, but they still fall into this try-hard category. The style could work in small doses, but Western media doesn't do moderation, so we get this one genre for animations so they can be distinguishable from kids' cartoons. Moderation would have probably just been Archer. Now, I personally don't like that show because I don't like this style of over-the-top adulting things, but I can see the show has merit. It has an entire cake, and the excessive smut talk and meta-commentary is just the icing. And it works. Archer picked a lane, knew what it was, and stuck it out. Shows like Velma, Vox Machina, etc., however, are just copying that style in a desperate fashion to prove they're not for kids. You can always tell with these shows by how much the humor sounds like that of a middle schooler. Compare these to the live-action Hollywood shows made for audiences with fully developed brains, and amazingly, there's at least some variety. I suppose that's because live action doesn't feel like it has to assert itself as being for grown-ups. Animation in the US, however, still feels the need to prove it's not for kids. It's too bad media companies have decided to do this in the most childish way possible. Rather, maybe they should have looked towards adult animation done right, and yes, we are heading towards anime. The Japanese knew what they were doing with their animation and don't need to prove it's for adults. In anime, you have shows like Morio no Hako, a detective story that makes Memento look straightforward and simple by comparison. This show doesn't have to prove anything. You just listen to the ideas about Morios, demons that lead people to commit murder, and the philosophical ideas presented about why people commit crimes, and you know, this is made for adults. And if kids can keep up with the backwards, upside-down timeline, they deserve to watch some intelligent content too. Or take the movie The Silent Voice, set in a high school following the life of a former bully now outcast, depressed, and unable to connect or even make eye contact with other people. This is a movie that takes seriously the flaws of humans, our tribalistic natures, teen depression, and even attempts at suicide and the effects it has on families. These animated shows don't need to pretend they're for adults like Velma does. They are clearly mature in their presentation and how they treat serious matters. Animation in the US fails because it still has to prove it's meant for adults with gore and smut. Otherwise, how would you know these talking pixels aren't just for kids? I'm still hopeful the animation industry in the West will catch up to Japan and even the gaming industry eventually. Because I love animation. It's my favorite type of media, and seeing stories created around the culture I grew up in and not hating it, that's very important too, would be fantastic. But that's not today, and certainly not with Velma. Western animation has a lot of growing up to do. We've gotten out of the strictly cartoons are for kids phase and have moved straight into the middle school humor, online troll behavior, and fanfic stories, but maybe something for actual adults with more than 2 brain cells rubbed together will come next. In the meantime, anime still puts every adult Western animation to shame. Okay, good rant. That's all for now. Ciao!